the vast ice has reflected the solar energy back into the space as albedo, and it has regulated the global temperatures for several centuries. So now if you look at the long-term simulations that has been done regarding the Arctic in our laboratories or in our researches, it is saying that we will be completely ice-free in Arctic by 22nd century. The black carbon emissions, when they deposit on the glaciers, what will happen is it shall accelerate the ice melting because the dark color absorbs heat more. USA always says that we need to follow the rule-based order. Yes, of course, very good. And it says there should be freedom of navigation in Arctic. Very good. But you know, something shocking. US has not ratified UN clause. Good evening, students. Welcome to Vision Eyes, and myself Kasam Suhas Shetty. So I'll be bringing you a new topic of discussion, that is the geopolitics of the Arctic. Okay. So now there's a new era because of the climate change. There's a new era where you will see competition and certain strategic re-evaluation in the Arctic areas. So if you look into this, there is a new dawn into the Arctic. So presently, to start with, let us look at one aspect of the Arctic, like which was for centuries, it stood very much as a remote and inaccessible area. But what you can see is, over the time, these frozen forms have, for over the time, these frozen forms have actually been a barrier for any sort of commerce or also the geopolitical tensions in the area. And this was seen, the Arctic region was seen as the world's refrigerator. See, the critical component of this Arctic area is its influence on the global climatic system. See, the vast ice has reflected the solar energy back into the space as albedo, and it has regulated the global temperatures for several centuries. Now, the role it had played as a climate anchor was very profound, very significant, and also it is sort of irreversible. But today, it is no longer standing as such a solid contributor for the global climate pattern. So what you can see is this particular presentation or this particular reporting that I'm bringing you is going to propose one thing, that the melting of the Arctic ice is not just an environmental phenomena, but what you can see is it is a very fundamental geostrategic game that is coming forward on the international platform that defines the international power dynamics. And the melting of Arctic ice can be seen as a powerful catalyst that is going to play the international politics or geopolitics, let us call it as. So now, see, there is a rapid retreat of the sea ice in this region, which is very much unimaginable, because and also, we can say, because this is melting, right? It is going to provide a lot of economic opportunities, particularly in the name of shipping and resource extraction. Okay. So now, when you look at this here, specifically, what you can see is these, dissolving of the geographical barriers. Once these barriers separated several nations, today, the dissolution of these barriers is actually forcing the major global powers like Russia, USA and China to sort of recalibrate and reassess and rethink their strategic priorities. Most importantly, they are competing for their influence in this region. Let us see how that competition will be for the future. Okay, so now here what we'll be looking at is basically beyond a casual link that is there between the climate science and the international relations. So, to be very simply putting forward what we are going to learn today is that the warming of Arctic is like a theater for new era of geopolitical competition. Okay, so now in this particular analysis, we will look into some scientific basis for this transformation and the economic opportunities it's going to create and the evolving strategies of the most powerful nations and also the assessments of the complex security and also the governance challenges that will be put forward. Okay, now we'll be looking at something that is an unprecedented transformation. Now let us step into our topic. So when you look at the unprecedented transformation here, so roughly what is happening in the polar areas? Look, there is sort of an environmental transformation that is happening there. Like, for example, we have the satellite records almost since 1979, which is showing us regarding the rapid decline of the environmental conditions in polar areas, especially Arctic. If you look at the data, the basic aspect is the rate of sea ice loss. The rate of sea ice loss that you are seeing like is very much a staggering and also a challenging numbers in the past 1000 years. Like, see, on an average, if you look at the Arctic that has lost is basically almost like 73,000 kilometers, square kilometers has been lost. Okay, this is like, if you look at roughly like per year, there is a greater loss of 73,000 square kilometers of ice per year, especially in summers. While in winters, it is somewhere around 31,000 kilometers of loss, square kilometers of loss. This has been since 1979. Moreover, this decrease in the summer ice is showing a trend of 12.7% decline per decade. This is something that you can see. Moreover, see, in the last 18 years, starting from 2007 to 2024, we have seen the lowest ice extent, which is like completely recorded by the satellites. Lowest ice extent is seen between 2007 to 2024. So now, see, September 2020, the monthly average of the sea ice extent was somewhere around 3.92 million square kilometers, which is for the second time that has come below the 4 million square kilometers. Okay, 3.92 million square kilometers is like below the 4 million square kilometers mark that has happened for the second time in September 2020. So what you can see is the other important aspect here is that it's not just the decline or melting of the ice, but it is also like very important thing is basically the ice itself is becoming fundamentally different. Like what? See, the ice is getting thinner and younger. Okay, because when it is, see, you can, this can be seen as a bigger threat because when the ice is thinner and younger, of course you will see it cannot survive the summers. It will melt, and the multi-year accommodated ice is already getting melted. So there is loss of older resilient ice, and the newer ones are not much resilient. Okay, so roughly what you can see is that over the last 4 years, almost you can see there is a consistent decline. Like multi-year ice remaining today is like somewhere only 4.4% by 2020, which was earlier 33% in 1985. Multi-year ice refers to old ice, over the years that is accumulated. But today what we have is just 4.4%. That is what I'm saying. Fundamentally, the ice that we have in the Arctic today is completely different. Okay, so now if you look at the long-term simulations that has been done regarding the Arctic in our laboratories or in our researches, it is saying that we will be completely ice-free in Arctic by 22nd century. Okay, so, and like, on the other hand, if you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their assessment report, 6th assessment report that came in 2021, has suggested that the, ice-free September, has the sea ice dropping way below like 1 million square kilometers. Okay, so by 2050 almost we will not have that much also. Okay, so this is something that you can look at. But there is something called the permafrost paradox. See, the permafrost is a feedback loop and it has significant consequences. Like for example, the melting sea ice is not just the climate variable, okay, but what you can see is this melting sea ice as a climate variable, what I'm trying to say is driving the changes in the Arctic. But not just that, but this region is noticeably known for the permafrost ground that has remained frozen for almost like 2 or more centuries by now. Okay, but now there is a alarming rate of thawing, that is defreezing, okay, that you can see. So this will be the second most destabilizing climatic factor of the region. Okay? So now when you look at this, the permafrost that is present in the Arctic and also the temperate regions will actually, if you look at, they have been storing the carbon. Okay, they have been storing the carbon almost, which is in terms of amount, it is 2 times more than what is actually present in our atmosphere. Okay, I am speaking about the carbon. 2 times more than what is there in our atmosphere. Now, like this carbon, this 2x carbon is stored in this frozen sheets or like the frozen organic matter for thousands of years by now. See, now if the ground actually starts thawing, that means melting or defreezing, okay, if they start thawing, what happens is the microbial decomposition comes to life. Now, like the microbial decomposition of this matter as it starts, okay, what you can see is there will be huge amount of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide and methane, that will be released into the atmosphere. Okay, see, methane, if you see particularly, it is very potent contributor for global warming because in a span of 20 years, what carbon dioxide can do, 100 times will be the impact of methane as a global warming or greenhouse gas. Okay, now this release of the stored carbon, this release of the preserved carbon from the permafrost will actually amplify the concept or the phenomena of global warming. So now this environmental process is very much direct, and that's why I said it's a paradox. Okay, now this paradox is going to have certain geopolitical implications, right? That is something we need to look at. See here, like for example, let me tell you one important aspect here. When the ground thaws, there will be huge amount of land erosion, there will be huge amount of landslides, mass movements, ground collapse, instability in the Arctic region. And also, this will damage the infrastructure that is developed, critical infrastructure that is developed across the Arctic. Now, let me give you one very good example. In Alaska, there is Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. Okay, because of the effects of the permafrost thaw that is melting, what you can see is the support, the vertical support that is given for this pipeline system has been tilting almost 7 degrees over 3 years. Now think about this. Okay, think about this. How is it destabilizing the ground? Right? On the other hand, so what will the engineers do? Engineers will have to devise some costly specialized solutions, like there are something called thermosiphons. Okay. Thermosiphons. Okay. These thermosiphons are used to stabilize the ground so that the pipelines which are constructed, or roads that are constructed, or any other facilities, infrastructure that is constructed will not actually be sort of damaged. Is that clear? So that is something that you can see. While if you see, as the warming continues, of course you can see the Arctic will open for new economic opportunities. Is that clear? So now, for example, that ways if you see, that means what I am trying to tell you is the very simple climate change, the very complex climate change, am I right? Yes, the very complex climate change is facilitating some simultaneous, aspects, one on positive, one on negative. Many on positive, many on negative. Okay, so see, especially for nations like Russia, which is presently investing heavily in the ports, railways, airfields, especially along the northern coast of that country. Now, these investments are basically are building in the areas where literally it is going to be very much muddy, soggy, and would require a lot of financial support and commitment to maintain such infrastructure they are developing. Okay, so now as this melting starts, there is these things happening in countries like Russia, China, and USA and Canada, because very simply this is something called as the geopolitical race to exploit the Arctic. Okay, to show the dominance of a power in the Arctic. But remember, this is self-destructive. This is self-destructive. This is going to be self-destructive. Okay, so now let us look at the further aspects. Let us unlock what is that commerce, what is that economics. Let us unlock that. Okay, now see, the retreat of ice is actually transforming the Arctic. So far we have seen this. See, it's going to open up an economic frontier, correct? It's going to open up an economic frontier where it is going to bring opportunities for trans-Arctic shipping, right? Which is going to define or reshape the entire global maritime trade. See, there is a race in the Arctic for shipping lanes. Okay, there is a race in the Arctic for shipping lanes, and there are two shipping pathways which are very important. One is the Northern Sea Route, and the second one is the Northwest Passage. Okay, so now when you look at the Northern Sea Route, let us start from the Northern Sea Route. But chalo, remember this. The Northern Sea Route is seen as an alternative to the Suez Canal. The Northwest Passage is seen as an alternative to Panama Canal. Okay, so now starting from the Northern Sea Route. The northern sea route is along the Russian north coast. Is that clear? So now what you can see is, this is the most commercially viable one than the Northwest Passage. Okay, see, this is a very good shortcut from Europe to Asia. Like, you can see, there is an ice-free port, okay, where, like, if you start traveling through the Atlantic Ocean, okay, crossing the, through the Atlantic Ocean into the Arctic towards Russia, Scandinavian and Russia, there you can see there is an ice-free port of Russia that's called Murmansk. Murmansk is an year-long ice-free port. Okay, so from Murmansk in Russia to Yokohama in Japan, okay, what you can see is, if you take the Suez Canal route, it's going to be somewhere around 840 nautical miles via the Suez Canal. But now, as the Arctic melts, the Arctic ice melts, it opens a sea route which is just 5,770 nautical miles. Okay, so where you can see there is significantly 30 to 40% of reduction in the sailing time, and also the fuel consumption, and also drop in the carbon dioxide emissions. But don't think about the carbon dioxide emissions, because we are going to emit in a different way from the permafrost. Now, see, Russia, that's the reason, has been actively developing several network of ports in this region. Okay, like the Sabeta, Dixon, and Pevek, and so many others. Okay, so this is seen as a very reliable alternative to the traditional sea lanes. Okay, because see, if you look at Red Sea is very much like prone for piracy. Okay, so similarly, if you see Strait of Malacca, okay, Strait of Malacca is very much congested. So we can say this is a very good alternative. Okay, and on the other hand, there is Northwest Passage. Northwest Passage happens to travel through the Canadian Arctic islands. Okay, so this is very much, like we can say, or very less viable compared to the other one, which is like the northern sea route. Okay, because this is actually not good for commercial shipping. What you can see is, here the route becomes very complex because there are shallower places because of the continental shelf, and also there they can be seasonally choked with like multi-layer ice and icebergs. So looking into that unreliability of the conditions, we can say this is very difficult to actually access. Okay, so that is something you can see. This is the first dimension of the economics that you can tap into. Next, look at this. The second one is the resource-rich nature, okay, of the Arctic. Now, when you look at the resource-rich nature of the Arctic, see, of course, Arctic is attractive. Of course, Arctic is very powerful. Not because of its just the limited aspect that we have seen so far, that is called the transportation corridor, but it is attractive and powerful for the rich resources it holds. Okay, it has several undiscovered resources. At 2008, there was an assessment by the US Geological Survey, which has estimated that the north of Arctic Circle actually holds approximately 90 billion barrels of the conventional oil that is still undiscovered. 90 billion barrels, okay, and it has 30% of the undiscovered conventional natural gas of the world. So think about this. Now you can see how rich is this region. Also, it, like, if you look at these resources, almost 84% are on the offshore. Okay, see, there is Russia's one place called Rosneft. Okay, so look at this. This is what I was saying. 90 billion barrels estimated north of Arctic, undiscovered natural gas 30%, and like 84% are offshore. Now, if you look at this, there is Russia's Rosneft, which basically holds 82 million tons of oil deposit that is discovered in the Barents Sea area in 2022. Okay, see, Russia, Rosneft has discovered almost like 82 million tons of oil deposits in 2022. Over this, think about Norway. Norway has been introducing several record numbers of like the oil and gas exploration blocks from this region. Not just this, it doesn't stop there. The resource count doesn't stop here. There is one more. Arctic is significantly rich in the rare earth metals. Okay, it is significantly rich in rare earth elements like neodymium and dysprosium. Okay, neodymium and dysprosium, which are the critical elements in the global energy transition to the renewable part. Okay, now think about this. Why won't the countries fight for this region? Why won't the geopolitical tension shape up in this region? Okay. Further, let us now look at a case study. Okay, here. Before we go into further, see, let me tell you about a case study where we are looking at the cost of development. Okay, see, of course, now we have clearly established that Arctic region holds a huge economic potential, right? So what you can see is basically this economic potential to be exploited, the resources actually faces several challenges. Okay, there are several challenges. The first one is environmental risk. When you look at the environmental or safety risks, see, anyways, if you increase the industrial or shipping activities in the Arctics, it is going to disturb the fragile ecosystem irreversibly. Okay, like for example, let us say the shipping uses something called heavy fuel oil. HFO. It uses something called heavy fuel oil. Okay. Now what happens is this heavy fuel oil, which actually sort of, if for example, if there is a threat of spill, okay, then what you can see is in the cold ice-filled waters, this heavy fuel oil will start to break down very slowly. When it breaks down very slowly, and also when we do not have an efficient method to clean it up, then remember this, it's going to pose a greater threat to the aquatic ecosystem and also the basic Arctic ecosystem. See, on the other hand, when the ships pass through the region, imagine there is black carbon emissions. Okay, basically when there is no complete combustion, there will be the soot, that is the black carbon. The black carbon emissions, when they deposit on the glaciers, what will happen is it shall accelerate the ice melting because the dark color absorbs heat more. Okay, so ice melt when increases, you will actually see there is lesser albedo and that will trap more heat by the ground because the glaciers are melted. Okay, so now this is the environmental cost. Let us look at the economic hurdles. See, simple. If you want to develop the Arctic oil and natural gas projects, now the cost will be almost 50 to 100% greater than running the similar projects in the temperate and tropical areas. Why? Because you need to draw longer supply lines from Arctic. Secondly, there is limited transportational access that you have. And thirdly, you need specialized equipments to function in such cold temperatures. And fourthly, you need to provide greater wages and also social benefits for the employees who are working in such, like, inhospitable and isolated climatic aspects. Okay? So this is something that you can see. Moreover, the infrastructure vulnerability, as I've already told you when I was teaching you the permafrost thawing, right? So the infrastructure in the Arctic Ocean, in the Arctic region, in the Arctic region will be destabilized because there is permafrost thaw, melting or like warming, and also the land degradation. Okay, so engineers now, they need to go for thermosiphons, which are very costly and like not still completely a solution. Okay, so there will be a lot of financial and technical hurdles of building such a projects in the Arctic areas. So it's a big challenge that we need to face. Okay, next. Now, let us look at the great power strategies. Like, see, post-Cold War, there is going to be a new Cold War. Okay, so post-Cold War, there is a new Cold War, especially in the higher north. Okay, so now let us look at this. The Arctic landscape is changing, so it is going to redefine the strategic power dynamics in this region. The world's most powerful nations, Russia, USA, and China, who are in the Arctic, self-proclaimed by China, but otherwise these other two are in the Arctic. They are going to come up with a greater, geopolitical competition in the near future. See, first let us look at Russia's dynamics. Russia has prominently asserted a strong. Okay, let us look at this. Now, the Russia has, the Russia has prominently asserted a strong dominance. See, very much simple. The Russia's strategy in Arctic is basically following its historical presence. It says it has come up with a renewed, strategy post-Cold War. Now the focus they are looking at is on military as well as economic presence, or military and economic reassertion, which is the one they are looking at. Okay, now see, Russia has a very large scale program where they are actually reinitiating the Soviet era military bases, and also they are constructing newer bases along the northern coastline. Okay, so like for example in the Alexanderland, or there is Trefoil military base. So Russia's northernmost military outposts are getting reinitiated. Now, why? See, there are strategic purpose for these bases. Okay, if you look at it, like basically Russia wants to secure its northern boundaries. Second one, it wants to sort of protect its source protect its resource deposits. And thirdly, it wants to control the northern sea route. It wants to control the northern sea route. Okay, so now these defensive zones or the military zones is equipped with very sophisticated weapon systems like the S-400. You know the value of S-400 already. Operation Sindoor has taught it us, right? So S-400, and also they have Pantsir S-1 that is actually defending the coastal region. Okay, and see, on the other hand, if you look at the military presence, especially in the Alexanderland. Okay, that is Alexanderland is an area of Russia. Okay, so where the Russia has actually set up multi-layered maritime as well as coastal protection systems. Is that clear? So now there is like sort of already several military presence for safeguarding the Kola Peninsula and several other bases. Okay, now see here, all these are fine. You know where Russia dominates? Russia dominates, there is no comparison. It is unrivaled in the fleet of icebreakers. Okay, in the fleet of icebreakers. Now, Russia is having the world's largest fleet of 42 vessels of, like, out of which 8 of them are nuclear powered. These nuclear powered icebreaker giants, okay, they can actually produce such a unique power and endurance where they can have the capability to smash and cut through the ice which is almost 10 feet thick. 10 feet thick. Okay. So, year long they can be used. Year long they can be actually navigable. So, what happens is if you want to use the Northern Sea route, let us say you have a commercial vessel, this will be escorted, icebreaker will be going, behind that you will be go. So that is the power of Russia. And if you think it is just the commercial purpose, you're wrong. This particular icebreaker fleet can function for commercial escorting. Along with that, it can act like a military naval, vessel. Okay, so that is something you can see. Now see, this fleet that you can see is serving dual purpose, both commercial purpose and military purpose. Okay, now you think about this. There is no other country that can actually rival this power. Okay, so that is the thing. And now if you look at United States, USA, like during the decades that followed the Cold War, what they did was they happened to look at the Arctic as literally the low tension zone. And they looked at this Arctic as a zone of cooperation. Okay, so they happened to sort of decline the infrastructure and military presence in this region. But now their approach is changing. Okay, now they are actually trying to respond to Russia's military and the naval dominance, or let us say Russia's dominance in the Arctic. Okay, not just that, there is one more power we have not discussed about, that is China's growing ambitions. Okay, in 2022 there was a national strategy for Arctic region, and in 2024 the Department of Defense Arctic strategy happened to come up very significantly, showing that there is a policy shift by US regarding the Arctic. Okay, now the documents they have framed is actually showing a great power competition. So it is emphasizing on security enhancement, homeland defense, and also collaboration with the NATO allies. Okay, so now, US strategy generally is focusing on monitor and respond. So that means basically whatever Russia does or China does, you respond accordingly. That is what they are looking at. Okay, see here they are trying to strengthen their relationship with the NATO allies. That is also one point we need to remember. Okay, so here, see one more thing to tell you how they are actually sort of strengthening with the NATO allies is they are going for joint training exercises, intelligence collaborations, and also like they are investing in new sensors and developments through the collaborations, all these things. Okay, so what you can see is there is this particular aspect the US is doing, but there is a weakness of US. Okay, there is a critical, like unaddressed weakness of US. The US position is undermined because it has the old age fleet, which is hardly just 2 to 3 of them like basically, chalo, let me say very clearly, there are only 2 operational icebreakers USA has. What Russia has is 42, and they are still developing more. Okay, they have, but USA has only 2. That is Polar Star and also Hele. So don't you think it's a weakness? Of course, right? So, but they are actually planning new vessels which are going to be coming in the polar security very soon. The program is called the Polar Security Cutter Program, which is a long-term investment. US is leaving on it and is going to bring the strength in its icebreakers. Okay, so that is the thing. Now, this was about US. Okay, this is the US strategies. Now, this is the next one that we need to look at. China. China is an interesting player there. Okay. China is actually an interesting player where China is providing some sort of tensions or concerns to the Western nations. Here, despite China, you might be thinking, despite China is so distant from Arctic, what role does it have in Arctic? That's the question. See, what has happened is, Beijing has declared itself as a near Arctic state. Okay, it has declared itself as the near Arctic state, and it has very clearly asserted that it has a right for a greater role and importance to be played in the Arctic regions, any governance or geopolitical affairs. Okay, in 2018, they released an Arctic policy white paper where China laid out, or China came up with its vision, which says that they will be developing something called the Polar Silk Road. Okay, so now the plan is very simple. They want to utilize the thawing sea lanes in the Arctic and extend that Belt and Road initiative, like that can actually put a new polar silk route that is connecting Europe and Asia. That is what they are planning for. So China has clearly stated in that paper that its goal in the polar area is very simple: scientific research, resource utilization, and also peaceful cooperation. Okay, so that is what they have established, they have actually put forward as their goals, and they have started to establish research stations, and also they are operating icebreakers. They have 2 icebreakers. Okay, if you look into the Chinese activities very closely, what you can see is there is a lot of gap between what is their ambition and what is their achievement. Okay, because recently there was an Harvard University study which has actually identified that China has a narrative that they are saying they are going to buy up the Arctic. They are going to buy the Arctic. Okay, but it is, according to this study, it says it is very much exaggerated. Where you can see, like there are several projects, there are several proposals that has been stalled. Where the transform, or what do you say, where the transactions are completed, they are like very less percentage. Okay, so China has proposed investments even like outside of Russia. Especially, like if I have to give you one example, 7 projects out of 8 projects that were actually put in Greenland have failed. Okay, have actually failed because of several factors. Okay, like for example, there is domestic political obstacles. Okay, and secondly, environmental concerns. And the most important third aspect is that the security concerns they have with the presence of China for the Arctic states. Okay, so now like this has like sort of created like a sort of what do you call, China has been very far from what is its ambition. Okay, but on the other hand, like you can see, there are certain Chinese and Russian collaborations, like especially because of the Western sanctions due to Ukraine and Russian war. Russia has depended heavily on China. Okay, like you can call it as a transactional relationship or a marriage of convenience, where you can see like several LNG and mineral projects in Russia are actually developed by the technologies of China. Okay, funding capital as well as technologies. So that is something you can see. That ways they have deepened their ties with each other. They are conducting joint naval exercises in the extreme climate, and they have increased the cooperation between them. And now, like though it is not a full-fledged alliance that you can see between China and Russia, but still what you can see is that the relationship is more dependent. Okay, so that is the main concern for the third one, that is USA. Okay, so this is something that you can look at. So now this is the geopolitics that is shaping up in the Arctic between the three powers. Okay, so that is the thing. The next one is basically what is the contested future? How is the governance, security, and several scenarios going to be? See, if you look at this economic and strategic opportunities where the melting of Arctic is going to create, then of course it is having both positives and negatives. That's why it's a complex but a contested framework that needs to come up. Okay, so there is role of international law. We can say there is actually the role of international law. Like for example, if you look at what is actually the framework that is governing the Arctic, it is the United Nations Convention on the Law of Sea, UN clause. UN clause actually provides, okay, see if this is the land, from the land 12 nautical miles, okay, 12 nautical miles is basically the territorial sea, and you have also like 200 nautical miles which is the exclusive economic zone. Is that clear? So now, like this is something like you can see in the exclusive economic zone, any country shall have the right to explore and exploit the natural resources. Okay, but now the main question is, what if you want to extend beyond 200 nautical miles? You have to place a request at UN clause. Okay, you have to place a request at UN clause, and that should actually be having a scientific evidence for your request. Okay, so now like basically there is a competition between three nations, Russia, Greenland, I mean Denmark and Canada, for one particular place that is called Lomonosov Ridge. Okay, it is an underwater massive mountain range that runs through the North Pole. Okay, so there is some sort of like competition between them. So now there is actually, all these are like some sort of the competition that you can see at UN clause coming up, that is going to potentially bring a geopolitical friction. On the other hand, there is adding spice to this, that is USA. You know what is the USA's position? USA always says that we need to follow the rule-based order. Yes, of course, very good. And it says there should be freedom of navigation in Arctic. Very good. But you know, something shocking. US has not ratified UN clause. Okay, so now, so whatever it says, it's going to be something very weak to be taken up. Okay, so that is the thing. Overall, this is something that you can see. On the other hand, let us look at the second one, the military escalation or the militarization of the new security landscape that we can see in this region. Arctic is going to bring huge amount of increase in the military activities. Okay, so already you know Russia has several Arctic bases and they have deployed like S-400 and several other like you know systems, military systems, and like now this is going to renew the focus of USA and NATO powers in this region. So you can also see recently there were military exercises. Like for example, if you see, like Russia had Zapad 2025, I mean 2025, and also NATO had Arctic Light 2025. So if Russia does something, NATO will do. If NATO does something, Russia will do. So it's going to escalate the militarization of Arctic. Okay, so but this is an extreme environment, very fragile environment, and this strategic competition is going to be detrimental. Okay, so the presence of such powerful military assets with lack of any communication protocols, okay, is going to actually put the world into the risk of miscalculation. Okay, where you can see history shows Arctic as the zone of cooperation. Like you can speak about the 1988's Arctic Cooperation Agreement that was between US and Canada, and also the Arctic Search and Rescue Agreements. But now it seems like it's not going to be anymore the zone of like you know cooperation. Very simply, this current climate change is going to trigger a power competition, and it is going to erode the sensitive environment and the fragile ecosystem and the stability of centuries. And very importantly, there will be miscalculations that is going to bring unintended and unwanted conflicts, especially in the range of asset deployment and militarization. So, what is the future projections? Okay, so what exactly is the future projections? That is something that we need to look at. Now, when you look at the future projections, there can be certain scenarios. Like, see, first one, there can be continued competition. That means, in this scenario, what happens is, both the military and economic rivalry will keep intensifying, and there will always be a threshold limit below which this intensity will be fluctuating. Okay, so there will be high intensity, I mean, or let us say high risk of militarization of this region. Okay, so nations will start to build the dual use infrastructure, one to secure the economic opportunities like shipping lanes and also the resource exploitation, two to conduct military exercises. This is something they'll be looking at. Okay, but still there will be some degree of shared respect for the international law. That is first scenario. What can be the second scenario? The resource scramble. When you look at the second scenario, what happens is basically there will be immense amount of financial and logistical cost that is going to be put into this area. There will be large scale resource extraction that will happen, but eventually the nature makes it unfeasible economically as well as technologically. So only the ones with the committed like resources to extract and exploit the natural resources can survive such race. Okay, so that means Arctic is going to be a geostrategic importance, where the reality of this ecosystem is going to shut down the opportunities for the countries. Probably, but this is something, a scenario that is, I don't think so, something it can happen like that. But on the other hand, there can be a new cooperative framework. That is the third scenario that you can look at. Here, what you can see is the threat of climate change and environmental degradation is of course non-negotiable and undeniable. I don't say non-negotiable, at least undeniable, right? So what can happen is these powers, they can sit together, they can bring legally binding international agreements to govern the Arctic and also work to reverse the climate change. This is the third one. So what I'm trying to tell you here is these are the three possibilities that can be seen in the near future. So to conclude, what I would say is, yes, the melting of Arctic ice is the fact, and it's going to be the game changer for the 21st century geopolitics. And nevertheless, don't sort of forget about the immense potential it has. Like, for example, the shipping, the resources like natural gas, crude oil, and also the the rare earth elements that can be used for the transition into the new energy, renewable energy, all these things. So that is the reason, as we have seen, the three powers are contesting for their dominance in the Arctic: Russia, USA, China. And this is going to be decided by the unmatched icebreaker fleet that Russia has, and the military base and the long coastline it has. Okay, while US is also shifting, as we have seen, from cooperative stance to something that is called vigilance and great power competition stance. And China has proclaimed itself as the Arctic state, or sorry, near Arctic state, and it is also trying to develop its polar Silk Road. Okay, so now considering all these things, what is the future of Arctic is still in the hands of these nations, and let us see how it's going to shape the global economy, the global climate, and the security landscape of this region. That's it from this session. Thank you.